So I'd like to welcome Kevin Snowball, who's the Chief Exec of We Care Home Improvements, and that's an organisation that works alongside health and care organisations to keep people at home and to keep them living independently. I'd also like to welcome Annie Francis. So Annie has worked for 20 years championing a holistic approach to midwifery. She founded Neighbourhood Midwives, I think the first self-managed team of midwives in the UK, and she has recently managed its closure. So some interesting conversations to go on here. This is Peter Brook. So Peter holds the space for Buurtzorg teams that are emerging within health organisations in Kent. And this is Matt Bell, who has led organisations that have been moving towards self-management and currently is a system leader in Plymouth who are implementing all sorts of new and radical approaches. So for those of you who haven't been part of a fishbowl before, what we're going to imagine is that these four people are in a pub or in a cafe, and we're going to drop in, we're going to eavesdrop into their conversation. Now, we're a little bit short on time today. So normally what happens is the conversation flows out into the audience and then back into the fishbowl. We're a bit short on time, so we're going to try a tech solution to this, which is Slido.com. So if you haven't found it already, there is free Wi-Fi available, and you can upload your thoughts and your questions into this new amazing tech solution. And we'll make that available to you this afternoon as we move into the Action Cafe. So, just to set the scene for this conversation. Nobody has all the answers. This is about co-creating the solutions and what works now. So when we challenge ourselves to reimagine health and care and other public services, we rely upon early adopters to lead the way, harvest the learning and fail forward to gain essential insights for others to build on. In transforming the systems and the services, we also transform ourselves. As radical leaders and learners, I would invite you to share with each other your experiences of leading and learning in this way.
So I drew short straw, thanks Annie, for getting us kicked off. The reason that we were so keen to do this from the SIG group was that we, for the last 8 months, have been really discussing in quite a lot, longer than that, 8, 12 months, discussing in great depth what it takes to be part of this change. And there was no better way that we could try and demonstrate what those conversations have felt like than doing it in front of everyone. So this feels really awkward. So my story is I think I just have a kind of gut reaction to why we need to move in this direction. I just know it's right. I don't know why I know it's right, but it's something to do with probably a relationship with a parent in the past. So if you really wanted to psychoanalyze me, I'm sure it stems from that point. And whilst I was leading in a charity in Exeter, I had a very collaborative, open, facilitative style. I then took time out of that and started with a charity last January as their CEO, and I took that style plus a load of really interesting, cool ideas that I thought were really exciting. They didn't, and I left after 5 months. So it was a real hard lesson in how not to pitch up into an organization with these snappy, whizzy ideas, and for it to land incredibly badly and awkwardly at times. There were, of course, massive highlights in the conversations that we had, but ultimately, I think I'm going to borrow Annie's phrase. It was like an immune response where you kind of just ejected stuff you were doing didn't fit. So for me, that was my experience, and since then I've started. I then went back into the fire. So I started as CEO with a charity now in Plymouth, but I'm not taking. It's a different approach, but it's not different because I've learned necessarily. So I'm gonna ask my colleagues to help out at this point.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Well, my journey was pretty similar in the sense that when you said it kind of feels right, but I don't know why it does, but it does, is not very scientific, and it's not really very helpful for any of the people, but actually that's exactly how it feels. I'm a chief executive of a home improvement agency, working frustratingly, supposedly in the middle of health and social care, but actually so far outside the walls it's unbelievable. And yet when everybody understands what we do, they say, well, where have you been for the last X number of years, particularly around hospital discharge and that kind of thing. And so working in a new way was really important for us to be able to establish ourselves as part of the system. But we'd been around for 30 years, and my career is also 30 years old. And having risen to the top of the tree in the hierarchical sense of the word, I realised that there was a much better way to be in an organisation, not to run it, but to be effective in an organisation. And so the most important thing was to learn to let go, which is a really scary place as a chief exec. It's particularly scary for my board because they're going, okay, we trust you, but we're not quite sure how much we trust you, and we're certainly not sure about how we trust everybody else in the organisation. So holding that line, with one foot in both camps, has been really tricky. The other thing that I've personally found is that for the first time in my entire life, I've been described as an early adopter. It's the last thing that I would consider myself to be, but it's quite an exciting place to be. And actually, there isn't a way to do this. You learn as you go. And if there's kind of one thing that I would leave everybody with, is feelings are more important than process.
Well, thank you. And I know that when we were thinking about doing this, we were thinking about some questions about what we might sort of use as a sort of basis for our thoughts, if you like. And one of those was about the joy. What was the most joyous thing that we had about the way we worked? And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking actually, bizarrely, there was joy along the way. We had little moments of real triumphs in amongst all the hard stuff. But bizarrely, we had to, when we had to finish at the end of January, which was about managing the closure, but not by choice, we've done loads of work with Andy Brogan and Easier Inc., and we'd also done a values workshop with Jackie, who's here, Jackie Lefebvre. And that values workshop had happened in just before Christmas, end of November. And we had done this extraordinary journey just in one day, and we'd come up with these values. We had purpose and values, and I think it's been mentioned before how important that is for an organisation. And our values were really amazingly well aligned, and all the midwives felt very strongly that we'd captured correctly those values. And it was about confidence and innovation and growth. And but the two that captured for me when we had to end, we had heart, which was about empowering people and being with them, and we had love. And I know love has been mentioned here before today, but love was our value that all these other ones came down into. And that love we described as for being nurturing the women that we were looking after and their families, and also each other. And I had to sit down with all these amazing midwives and everybody in the organisation, there's about 30 of us, and tell them that we had reached the end of the road and that we were going to have to close. And I wasn't sure. They knew that something was obviously amiss because we're very open, but they didn't know exactly what. And so I took a lot of time to try and explain in detail the reasons why, and then stopped and paused, and I asked, obviously, for questions, and everybody was very distressed. And one of the midwives put her hand up to ask the first question. And I was ready for any number of things. And her first question was, what about the women? What about the women that we're looking after? And that sort of set the scene for the rest of that discussion. And we closed, we went into insolvency, and the reasons why we're going to plan, we're having something called an after-action review. And I'm a midwife. I don't know all this sort of terminology. I'm learning it. But we're having an after-action review next week, and I'm really keen that it isn't about blame. It is about learning the lessons, because it is all the things we've talked about. It's about commissioning. It's about pilots not being given proper support. And it's one person's fault. But what we've done, and what the evidence before my eyes has been, is that when you truly work together and you grow a culture, which is difficult at times in the NHS, amongst midwifery, there is a lot of bullying. And we were able to demonstrate that love did win out, and that our culture has been very strong. And that's been the most powerful and actually joyous part of my journey in many ways. So anyway, this is a conversation, isn't it? Carry on.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing so honestly. That was really powerful. So I'm Peter Brook. I work for the Community Health NHS Trust in Kent. I want to sort of, I'm coming at this from quality. So whilst the self-management is of interest, I think it's about patient quality. It's about providing the best service we can, the safest service, the service that is most tailored to people's needs. And as we heard about the commissioning, it's about relationships and having teams that can deal with variety. People are infinitely complex, and by having that self-managed team, that the team can respond to that complexity. And I think another important point I want to make that really drives me is that I feel that with this work, we're moving from providing services into supporting community. So it is about an assets-based conversation with the patient and with the nursing and care teams. So it's the polar opposite of the sort of time and task way which we've been commissioned for far too long, which we know has actually led to more expense, more cost, and poorer outcomes. It's the polar opposite of that. It's putting the patient at the centre. What assets, what strengths has that patient got? What assets in the friendship group and in the informal networks has that patient got? How can they all be deployed to support better care? And again, with the nurses, I'm really fortunate in my role with the NHS Trust. So it's a traditional organisation, 5,000 members of staff. We have 460 policies. So if you're quick at maths, that's about 11 policies per person. And I'm very, very fortunate that my exec team realise that that's nonsense. We've paid for people to write those policies. We're paying for people to police those policies, to train people to meet those policies. We've got an industry in capturing data and information to track how we're doing. And yet, as an exec team, we're not confident that any of that is improving care. In fact, we think it's actually detrimental to providing good care. So that's what's driving us. How do we provide better care? How do we build community? And it is about, in my view, these very local, hyper-local teams building community that provides care, but also does provide services that fit into people's lives. Very much like the example we had from Gateshead. I've worked in local government in the past, and I think that was an incredible example of bravery, of how we need to change the dynamic. It's not about a public servant doing their job, which the person would be doing who was sending out the court summons or the bailiff. It's about, okay, this has happened. How can we work together in community to solve this issue together?
So I was just going to ask a question about bringing the sense of community back to us, and on our personal journey through that. So the communities that we exist in are the organisational communities that we're part of, or the wider community that we're all part of. Because for me, it all comes back down to my role in that. What is it that I'm doing? What conversations am I having? How am I having those conversations? What can I do? Because if I think back to the situation of kind of landing in and I kind of use the term landing because I did dump in Shared Lives, I didn't have a community. I had a community outside Shared Lives that gave me the momentum for my thinking, but I didn't take time to build that community inside Shared Lives. And that community, I might have decided was not the community I wanted to be part of anyway. And there was a tension in my mind about, well, how much do I set the scene of kind of where I'd like to go, and how much do I allow the conversations to emerge? And so I just, because I think it's really powerful once you start talking about your own personal experience of this type of change. What were the really difficult conversations? We talk about bravery and resilience, but bravery can sometimes look like stupidity. So what's the difference between bravery and stupidity? Or is there a difference?
There are a couple of questions coming up on the board there that I think you can kind of weave into some of these answers. The bottom one there about how is the leadership team working differently and role modelling the difference. I mentioned earlier about sort of feeling as though you had to let go, and if you frame that in a very hierarchical way, it sounds quite patronising, but actually it doesn't feel like that at all, because you've got great people in all organisations who do great work, and actually they're all people, and they do great things at home and in their private lives and in other organisations. And my biggest personal learning was not to see people as either job descriptions or colleagues, and that's all you knew them as to start with. So what I did was I always used to sit down with every new member of staff that joined my organisation to get to know them. But actually what I found was I didn't really get to know them because the conversation was all about work. So I then had to have the same conversation, and we didn't talk about work at all. We talked about their pets, their families, their football team, their whatever it might be, one's in a rock band, etc., etc. And actually the whole relationship changes because they then saw me as a person, not as the chief executive. That was the first thing that I did. And actually everybody else does that, and it deepens relationships. And the bit that I'm really worried about is people look at this and go, oh, it's all very fluffy. It's all about feelings. We've mentioned the word love. That's a really weird word to use in the workplace, but actually it's about deepening relationships. I don't use the word love personally, but I absolutely get it. And if those relationships are deep, then you then trust people, which is another question that came on there, to do the right thing, not give them some responsibility and stop them from going too far. And that is a massive, massive change for most people. So my personal joys, to reflect your word, Annie, again sounds patronising, and it's not meant to be, because people are really good at doing stuff and actually giving people the space to organise things for themselves and collaborate and get rid of their own silos, rather than me, as a member of the leadership team, restructuring the organisation like this, has unleashed a whole power within the organisation, which is really, really invigorating. Do they get everything right? No. Did I get everything right? No. But the collective wisdom is much better than consolidating it in a few people. And the other bit about trust that's really, really important is, if you want to give people that opportunity, you've got to let them make mistakes. And then learn from those mistakes, not jump on top of them. That's really when things start to gain momentum, but that's a very difficult thing to do.
Sorry, would you like them both? Yes, because the thing about having to demonstrate, so as a very small social enterprise, in what is seen, I mean, health is very risk averse anyway, and helping women have babies is a particularly risk averse area, I would say. And so we were very conscious that we had to get it right, and the risk of getting it wrong, if you like, making a mistake, whatever that was potentially huge. One of the trusts that worked in our area had some issues and didn't come to us, but went to our commissioners. That's the sort of challenge that we were up against a lot of the time. And it was about sort of, I know that was a sense of responsibility that I had about sort of holding the space for the midwives to work in a way that was about building relationships, was about continuity of care, was about making it work. And in many ways, the regulation, and the stuff this morning has just been fantastic, because if anything, I'm frustrated that I haven't got an organisation anymore to go back and try it in, because all of this does make sense. And I think one of those questions about if it is so obvious, why isn't it happening? And I don't know the answer to that. I think there is something about, maybe there has to be a tipping point, that enough people begin to talk about this and do it in a way that that sort of really begins to gel and happens and flows out. But we really tried very hard to model a way of being for midwives, because the trust is the key word as well. It's that whole thing about trusting individuals to go out and do the very best that they can do. And we all know that is what they do when that trust is given. But in order to do so, you have to sort of take that leap of faith as well, and be prepared to sort of hold the space for the people that were doing it, really. So yes, a challenge.
Yeah, I very much identify with that. It's about suppressing my ego, very much, a lot of the time, and it's about, you know, we're all trained to be, you know, problem solvers and have the answer, and it's absolutely the opposite of that. It's when you're working with the team, it's allowing the space and allowing them the time and the tools to get the answer for themselves, because they're the ones who've got to live with it. They're the ones who've got to make that solution work every day when I'm not there. So I see very much it is about holding that space. It is about protecting them from, you know, I do work in a very risk-averse organisation, but one of the things I had to sort of stop affecting the team was Brexit, because we're in the pointy bit of England, at points of France, and every team was asked to do a Brexit continuity plan, and I just, how is that honestly going to improve care for patients? Really? So it was just something I had to keep away from the team. Going back to the joy the joy is, as you said, it's seeing people step in to the potential we know they've all got. You know, they have been trained to make clinical decisions, difficult clinical decisions, and it's about, the joy for me really is seeing them make those decisions confidently without having to refer to a manager.
So, I've got two experiences. Let's not go to Brexit. I've got two experiences that I think highlight the difference for me, and it's about me as a parent. So one of my triggers is being on time. So I'm there, you know, we're running late, and I'm just really unhelpful, screaming at Ewan, get out the door, get your clothes on, get your shoes on. Meanwhile, he's getting really upset because I'm shouting at him, and there's a complete disconnect between myself and my child. But I can't reclaim that distance because I'm really worried about getting there at 9 o'clock. My wife has a completely different approach. She doesn't mind being late. And they have a much smoother, gentler leaving of the house, generally get there on time, but not often. But then you've got to ask the question, does it matter? And what's the purpose of getting all irate? And then I compare that, just so that you don't think I'm a completely awful parent, to the time that, you know, Ewan and I sit down and do Lego together. And we've got this sense of stuff we want to create. And he's into Star Wars at the moment. And he wants to make lots of Star Wars stuff. And we go about with a general sense of what we want to create. So I even woke up the other morning with a kind of, oh, maybe we could make that. So I know. I have so much joy from kind of doing Lego. Anyway, so when we're in that flow, lying on the floor, surrounded by Lego, creating this thing in front of us, the flow and the communication and the connection between myself and my son is entirely different to that incredibly unhelpful mode that I'm in when I'm trying to get out the door. And for me, that's the difference between me being helpful at work and me not being helpful at work. So when I find that mode where I'm in flow, and sometimes that's really easy because you have a really energetic conversation. When that's difficult, it's because someone's not quite agreeing with you, or you're not getting that sense of connection, and you're kind of frustrated. I get frustrated by not getting that sense of connection. So there's something about kind of managing your own stuff, your own ego, when you're in those moments, to kind of put that along, alongside, because you are important in that conversation. What you need to get from that is important, but you cannot let it drive the purpose of what you're trying to do. And that purpose is greater. And I think, kind of just going back to that thing about, when you're in organizations and, jumping in and perhaps that not being the right environment, is having that sense of a bigger purpose than just the organization. So we are all part of something, whether you call it a system, whether you call it a community, and you're playing a particular role in that. And if that role doesn't work out in that moment, in that team, in that organization, that's okay, because actually you're discovering something, whether that's your own personal learning or whether it's a set of connections that will then stand the test of time as you move forward. So.
I want to pick on something that you said, Peter, about this is all about providing better care for your clients at the end of the day. And I think this is really important to phrase, in my world, it's not about providing care in quite the same way, but this is about providing a more sustainable long-term business or the organisation that I run. It's not about getting on together and working nicely together. That is a fantastic byproduct. But actually, this is a business thing. This is about running organisations in a much more effective way than what we've all been used to and what the rules have allowed. And I've just got a really small but very tangible example of that. I have 20 guys out on the road that drive vans. They don't like emails. They don't like any form of communication like that. But they spend a lot of money on materials to put into people's houses. And as part of a business improvement exercise, the guy said, "Why don't you give us credit cards?" And my finance director then had a heart attack. And then they thought about it and thought of all the work that was going into actually processing all of these invoices, petty cash in the vans, all the security. We had come up with goodness knows how many policies for all that kind of stuff, but it was nice and safe. The Audit and Finance Committee were delighted with the processes that we had. Why don't we give them more credit cards? So they thought about it for a bit, and the Finance Department said, yeah, okay, but we need to have a policy. So they went and got a policy, brought it to me, and it was 7 pages of a credit card policy. So given that we were in self-organising, I couldn't say, no, we're not going to do it like that. I said, well, maybe think about a different way of phrasing it that says what they can be used for, rather than 7 pages of what they can't be used for. So they came up with 12 bullet points, and we've had 1 misuse of the card in the last year. And that was because the guy's got 2 Barclay cards and he used his personal one instead of his work one instead of his personal one, and he's paid it back. And the message that sent to the guys about being trusted as part of our cultural change from people who they're not in the office, they're not in the bubble, that they're out there, was really, really powerful. And that did more from a decision that was taken within the organisation than many other things.
It's because there's a question up there about developing trust and how do you really do it. And one of the things that we put back to the midwives, the team of midwives, was about how they organise their time. Obviously, they in their world, they planned their day, they did it together, they sort of took responsibility for that. But there's always that sort of, for those of us who had worked as independent midwives for many years, there was a sort of slightly purist approach to us as well, that you were available to women apart from when you were on holiday. And that's how we started off initially. And it became clear after a period of time that wasn't working for the midwives. We wanted, so there was a pushback but if you start to have a rota, they wanted a rota and they wanted to have time off on a regular basis, which sort of went against the original ethos of the way that we worked. And it was that same debate, but it's not up to us, actually. The point is that we're there to support them to come up with solutions. And so they went away and came up with a rota. The wonderful thing about it was that, so we gave it 3 months, and we said, right, and the measure should be the continuity in terms of how many times a woman has her own midwife, or a midwife she knows at the actual birth. For the 2 of those 3 months of the rota, as opposed to how they had been doing it, there was a higher rate of continuity because they built in flexibility and worked together to create something that really worked for them as a team. And it was a really good lesson because you come to these things, everybody's full of passion about how you want to make it work, and it's very easy to get into this idea that your passionate way is the right way. And then you have to absolutely let go of that and hand over that responsibility and that trust and everything else. And one of the great things about our journey was that I thought it would happen organically, that these sort of the processes and the things that were needed to sort of help them function as a team. And our learning has been that you do need systems, you do need an organizational sort of balance to it, but it comes from within the team, and actually our job is there to facilitate and to enable it to happen, but absolutely not to take ownership. And that's been one of my sort of lessons along the way, actually, because you sort of think, you know, but I know what I'm doing because I've done it this way for so long and I know it works. But there's many, many different ways, aren't there? You know, and it's about doing, okay, what's your way?